Hello, my name is Gabriel Said Reynolds. Welcome to Exploring the Quran and the Bible. I'm really glad that you're here. Thank you for spending some time on this channel, which is dedicated to delivering interesting content from smart people about Quranic studies and biblical studies. In this episode, I speak with Professor Tommaso Tesei of Duke Kunshan University in China, and in particular about a recent article he's written, which brings to the forefront a number of major questions about the formation of the Quran and the possibility that we should speak about authors and not an author, Qur'ans and not a Qur'an, and context and not just a context rather, when it comes to the origin of the Quran. So I think you really enjoyed this episode. We also get into some of the general contours and controversies in Quranic studies. Please, while you're here, do me a big favor. Take a moment to subscribe to this channel. Once you subscribe, please hit that bell button so you're notified. It will force YouTube to let you know when there's new material out. Also, like this particular video. Thank you so much. Hello, Tommaso. Good to be with you.
Hello, Gabriel. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, it's exciting to have you here. We know each other from a long time ago. We worked together for a year at Notre Dame on the Quran Seminar Project. I think it was 2012, 2013.
Yeah, exactly 10 years ago, I think.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I don't know, I have the impression that you liked working on the project, but maybe didn't like living in South Bend, Indiana. Is that basically right?
Well, as I always say, that experience completely reshaped my eschatological imagery. Now I imagine hell as a boiling lake of macaroni and cheese located outside of South Bend. But, just kidding. It was
okay. So our cuisine, yeah, our cuisine has something to be desired. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
But I heard that the campus changed a lot. There are many amenities now.
Well, the thing is that all American universities, and I think some European universities are copying this, they're all on this like endless, relentless building campaign, which to me is strange. I mean, what do I know? But as we're learning that content can be delivered effectively online with things like YouTube and exploring the Quran and the Bible, the universities, they haven't slowed down. It seems like they've sped up. They're just building more and more. And Notre Dame is like example #1 for that. So,
okay, well, at some point of my life, I really want to come back for a few days.
We'll feed you
no more than 3 days to check how the situation evolved over there.
Yes, yeah. Well, I have some great colleagues in Islamic studies generally, Quranic studies in particular. Munim Suri works with me. You know Munim from our time together, so he's still here at Notre Dame, and he appeared on Exploring the Quran and the Bible. So, well, anyway, we're going to speak about the controversies of Quranic studies, and we're going to center our conversation on an article you wrote called "The Quran." It's a little hard to read it or to explain the title, because you need to read it. So it's the Qur'ans in context, but the S on Quran and in context is in parentheses. So and I'll give you a chance maybe to explain that. Maybe that's a good place to start. But before we actually start, I'm going to read like a formal introduction so everyone gets to meet you and gets to know you a little bit better. So friends, Tommaso Tesei is an associate professor of religious studies at Duke Kunshan University. Before joining DKU, which is in China, maybe you can just say where it is in China.
It's I would say 1 hour drive from Shanghai.
Okay, great. So before joining DKU, he has been a Patricia Crone Member at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton and a Polonsky Research Fellow at the Leer Jerusalem Institute in Jerusalem. And before that, you wrote a PhD, I think a co-tutel between, maybe you can explain, between Paris and Rome, right?
Yeah, it's a joint project. It was a joint program. So between Sapienza University of Rome and INALCO in Paris.
In INALCO, okay, terrific. Professor Tesei's academic interests mostly center on the emergence of the Islamic movement and faith tradition, and on the consequential establishment of new religious and political authorities in the context of the late antique Near East. I would encourage everyone to look at his academia site. He's worked really in a way that allows us to see late antiquity and early Islam together as opposed to separated. He's worked extensively on the Byzantine context, but also Syriac writings and how the Quran is engaging with them in a way that brings together both a philological analysis of the Quran, but also a real robust sense of historical developments within the region. So you begin to see the text not just floating in space, but actually in a real context in time and space. I won't be listing all of his publications, his many publications, but I would just like to draw attention to the article we'll be speaking about, already mentioned, the Qur'ans in Context, published in Journal Asiatique, but in English. And I think it came out in 2021. I didn't note that. Is that right? Is it 21?
Yeah, I mean, it's the issue of 21, but it was actually published in 22. Sometimes journals are a bit late. Yeah,
that's like, there are certain ways in which time and space are relative, and one of them is academic publishing, where you see a year and it may not correspond to the actual year that it came out. So yeah, okay. Well, I'd like to start with a couple of questions just so we can get to know you a little bit better. So how did you end up studying the Quran and late antiquity and all of that?
Oh, well, it was a real journey, both intellectually and also physical journey, because it took place across, I think, 7 or 8 different countries and 3 different continents in which I've been first studying and then working. And well, the reason, as I usually like to say, is because of Alexander the Great. I reached the Quran because of Alexander. I was studying in Alco in France for my, after graduating at the University of Rome, I moved to Paris, and there I started studying Arabic medieval literature and narratology in particular with Professor Abu Bakr Shaibi. And I was really interested in these Alexander legends in medieval Arabic literature.
Can I ask, just to jump in for a second, do you remember like the first moment you realized that Alexander had an afterlife, after the actual conquest of this Macedonian guy, that within, late antiquity, there was fascination and interest in him?
Well, I mean, it actually started from the Middle Ages, because if I remember correctly, the first time I heard about Iskander Dhu-l-Qarnayn was while I was reading a passage of Al-Idris's book, so about Al-Andalus, and there was this very strange epithet of the two-horned one. So I really, and Idrisi, if I remember correctly, I think that Idrisi explains, Dhu-l-Qarnayn is Alexander, and there was a big debate among Arab scholars in the Middle Ages about the identity of Dhu-l-Qarnayn, but I think Idrisi mentions the name of Alexander. Then I was really interested in this character, and I started studying, analyzing the legends about the foundation of Alexandria, the building of Alexandria. Mm-hmm. And I started digging, how research works. I followed the steps that Alexander had left in world literature. And I was amazed to know that, at least according to some Western scholars, one of these, actually 2 of these Alexander legends made their way into the Quranic corpus. So we're talking about Surah 18 and the Moses pericope and the Dhu-l-Qarnayn pericope. So this is how I reached to the study of the Quran because of Alexander.
Okay. I want to pause with Alexander for a second before we get on to some other more general bits about, about Quranic studies. Because you mentioned that among medieval Muslim scholars, there's some controversy regarding the identity of Dhu-l-Qarnayn, and there still is today. So I imagine you've spoken about this on other YouTube discussions you've had. So I don't want to go into it at length and make you repeat everything. People can find it there. But I mean, when people say, "Oh no, Dhu-l-Qarnayn is not Alexander, can't be Alexander. What's your response?
It is Alexander, but not the historical Alexander. It is how Alexander came to be imagined by Syriac Christians in the 6th and 7th century. That is, as a Christian pious king who received the mandate by God to establish a Christian kingdom. Yeah. That's the way, the image of Alexander, which is reflected in the Quran, without, of course, all the Christian apparatus, and the ideology, the pro-Byzantine ideology.
Right. And maybe we should say, or I should have said from the beginning, that Dhu-l-Qarnayn means the two-horned one. So, and it's, as you alluded to, as a character who appears towards the latter part of the 18th chapter or surah of the Quran, because not everyone watching Exploring the Quran and the Bible will know all of the Arabic terminology or all of the ins and outs of the Quran. So, yeah, I mean, that explains why. I mean, a common argument is, oh, it can't be Alexander because Alexander was a pagan. Dhu-l-Qarnayn seems to be a protagonist or a believer in the Quran, and the Quran condemns paganism, so it just can't be. But I mean, you just explained it, that yeah, it's not Alexander the pagan, it's Alexander the I don't know, would you say proto-Christian? How would you put it?
I usually like to use this Latin expression that I think I made up by combining two different expressions. That is ante Christum natum rex Christianissimus. That is the very Christian king born before Jesus. Before
Christ.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Have you got involved with debates, I don't know, online or otherwise, with people who have been like, hey, Professor Tesei, I like your scholarship, but you're totally wrong. It can't be Alexander. Do you get involved in those debates? Or?
All the time. I mean, I usually don't really engage that much with social media like Twitter, or sometimes I even received messages on Facebook or Instagram of people asking me about Dhu-l-Qarnayn. But yes, all the time people tell me, no, you must be wrong. There is a very popular argument according to which Alexander is Cyrus the Great.
Dhu-l-Qarnayn is Cyrus the Great.
Yes, sorry, yeah, Dhu-l-Qarnayn is Cyrus the Great, which is partially true, because in the Syriac Alexander legend that inspired the Quranic passage, we have some kind of contamination between the character of Alexander with that of Cyrus, but this is a very long story that I addressed elsewhere.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, great. Okay, before we get to your article in Controversies in Quranic Studies, what do you do outside of when you're not reading the Quran or things about Alexander the Great?
Oh, well,
whatever, we're on YouTube, so whatever you feel comfortable sharing. Like how do you do movies, books, hobbies?
Well, before COVID, I used to be a very enthusiast of fitness, but now I'm not anymore after COVID, lockdowns and relocating to a different continent interrupted my career in CrossFit. So, but also a bad accident.
It's just harder there in Kunshan to get to the gym or to...
No, not really. I just got lazy, to be honest.
Okay,
so and, I had also very bad accident on the way. But so it's currently, I would say that most of my time when I'm not studying for my research, or I'm not teaching, which is also very time consuming, as you might know, I spend most of my time with my dogs. I have 4 dogs. Three of them were rescued in China. So,
and did one came with you to China, or?
No, one is still in Italy with my parents. I hope.
Okay, it's back in Italy. Okay, got it. Okay,
yes,
cool.
So,
yeah, our kids are all demanding a dog, and I think we're on the verge of giving in. So, yeah, we may join the world of dog ownership. Our cat won't like that though. Yeah, and we had a couple of games of soccer together.
Yeah, we did.
So yeah, I have memories of that. In fact, I think in our Quran seminar team, by the way, when I mentioned Quran seminar, there's a volume published by De Gruyter, which brings together 25 different scholars commenting on 50 different Quranic passages, 50 key Quranic passages. And you can find it through De Gruyter's website. Anyone's interested, open access. But that was a project that we did together when we weren't playing soccer. Okay, yeah, terrific. Mehdi Azayas was also a key player in that. Yeah, okay, well, let's get into this article, The Quranic Context. And yeah, I mean, to me, the article was really fascinating because it's not like total pessimism about what can be known of Islam's origins or emergence. Some people don't like the term origins anymore. Because you do state that like there are certain things we can know confidently about Islam's origins. You make some proposals for using the Quran as a historical source, also reading Islamic sources and non-Islamic sources about Islam's origins other than the Quran. So I wanted to start just by like outlining the things which you say we can know about Islam's origins. And I think I've got them all down here. One is that Muhammad existed. So there was a figure at the origin of this movement. And two, interestingly, is that we know what his vocation was before his call to prophethood, namely it was a merchant. So that agrees with the traditional, more or less with the traditional Islamic idea. There are also traditions, I think, of him being a shepherd, but I don't know if you need to comment on that. That there was a Jewish community with which or with whom Muhammad engaged, that at least some members of his community felt that the apocalypse or the end of time was near. And two more, that 622 was an important date. Of course, traditional date of the Hijra, when Muhammad and Abu Bakr went from Mecca to Medina, and that the Quran was circulating by the second half of the 7th century. So I don't know how you want to address this. I don't think I should ask you to go through all of those, but maybe you could comment on one or two and speak about generally like the way you can actually work with the sources to come up with solid historical arguments.
Yeah, so for the first two, that is Muhammad existed and Muhammad was a merchant. I think that we can just refer to Sean Anthony's book, which is a very good book published recently, and he goes through all the evidence. It would be enough to say that we have sources external to the Islamic tradition that confirm and which predate the Islamic tradition is important, yes. And which corroborate these two elements. As for
the book is, I just had to remind myself, I was going to try to guess the title, but it's Muhammad and the Empires of Faith, right? Sean Anthony's book.
Yes, exactly. I think it was published in 2019, if I'm not wrong. Yeah, because I was reading it during the lockdown in Budapest at the beginning of the pandemic. So I think it was either 19 or 20. This pandemic has been going on forever. So yeah, so this so for the first 2 points, our audience can go read Sean's book, which is I find excellent, by the way, especially for the way in which he addresses evidence from both inside and outside the Islamic tradition. As for the presence of Jewish community in the Hijaz, we have some graffiti, some inscriptions, I think, and there is an article by Robert Hoyland in one of the books you edited. I think it's in the Qur'an in its historical context too, New Perspective on the Qur'an. Yes, and as for the question of the calendar, the 622, I mean, we have the documents, a couple of papyri and some other documents that tell us that this year was important to the early community, because we have a new calendar system starting. It's counting from this year. So we must assume that something extremely important for the members of the community must have happened in that exact moment, or at least the way they remembered it.
I find it interesting that you're cautious in describing that, right? Because why not say, okay, this shows that this really was the year of the Hijrah, when Muhammad and Abu Bakr and, previous to them, some of their followers went to Medina or Yathrib from Mecca. Why the caution?
Because, nothing tells us explicitly that this year was remembered because of the Hijrah. We know that the year itself was important. If I'm not wrong, I think also Sean Anthony comments on this in his book, that in one of the documents, the early documents, where this new dating system is first certified, we also have an interesting reference to the migration of early members of the community, but nothing that can just be taken as, okay, this is the smoking gun, and we know that this was exactly the year. It's possible, even plausible maybe, but the only thing that we can infer is that that year was considered to be important, not more than that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is maybe for the last point that it's also the most controversial, I guess, that the Quran was already in circulation by the half of the 7th century. We can talk about that later, maybe. I must say that in the article, I might have overstated my confidence in the period for the emergence of the canon. And I did that with a specific purpose, because to me, honestly, it's not really important to know when the Quran first circulated. It's more important to make the point that even if it was already present, let's say that way, around 650 or around that time, as the tradition tells us, there is no need to assume that this text is a faithful representation of Muhammad's words, and even if only 2 decades elapsed between the traditional date of Muhammad's death and the earliest circulation of the Quran, the way we know, there is enough time to think that other materials entered the corpus. But we can talk about this later. So I think that it's possible that the Quran was already present in some form, let's say, around the mid-7th century. I'm not against this possibility, as I'm not against a later compilation of the text or reduction of the text. Also, the vocabulary we use might be controversial as well in this context.
Speak of redaction, right? Yeah. I feel like since I began in Quranic studies about 25 years ago, that maybe the 2 most consequential developments in which there's been a real shift, almost consensus on both. But the first is the arguments for the early dating of the compilation of the Quran. Compilation, codification, canonization, and they're all a bit different, but let's just say the compilation of the Quran. So so 25 years ago, the field was split between the majority of people who basically held to the traditional narrative spoke about the work of Uthman, the destruction of the companion codices. Basically, that was like this, but there was still a very sizable, I would say, minority community of scholars who would say, no, the first dated evidence we have is the Dome of the Rock. And even then, as you know, the inscriptions in the Dome of the Rock vary from in pretty significant ways from the text of the Quran as we know it. And so they would say, Abd al-Malik was sort of getting things going, but it might have been Walid, or if you follow, Wansbrough's arguments, maybe even later, maybe even Abbasid. And most people in that camp, or at least some people, have been convinced by different arguments, especially carbon-14 dating, but the nature of the Hijazi Qurans, to agree that the Quran comes from an earlier state. I mean, others have been convinced by arguments that Fred Donner and others have made that the difference between the language and the Hadith and the Quran shows the Quran's antiquity, and some others speak about. Anyway, so that's one. And then the other, I think, is more recent, which is, and maybe you could comment on either point, but that the evidence of inscriptions increasingly is showing us that the context of Islam's origins was monotheistic. And this actually comes up in the article, right? Because the tradition tells us, no, the Arabs generally, and the Meccans in particular, were pagans, like the worst kind. Of course, there's a value judgment involved, like pagan is bad, polytheist is bad, idolatrous is bad. So the worst kind of like decadent idolatrous pagans, the Kaaba was a house of idols. But now we're looking at inscriptions, and basically, after the 4th century, there are no more pagan inscriptions. They're all monotheistic, either explicitly Christian, some Jewish, or just monotheistic generally. So I don't know if you want to comment on either of those points.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I want to say something, because you mentioned the fact that many scholars now are a bit more confident about an early dating because of the C14, the carbon-14 dating.
Yeah, not everyone, but most, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I really don't. I think that as if we compare the situation of Quranic studies with other fields in which the carbon-14 dating system has been applied to manuscript, I see that in Quranic studies there is much more of the tendency to welcome this dating system with a bit too much confidence. Okay, we know that in other fields, scholars are a bit more cautious in taking the results of this system of dating manuscripts. But my friend Steven Shoemaker has a book which is coming on press in a couple of months, I think, and the addresses this issue much better than I could do here in 5 minutes, or than I could do in general. But so this for what concerns the manuscripts. As for the inscriptions, yes and no at the same time, because as far as I know, we don't have anything that can tell us that there was a Christian presence in the area of where Muhammad allegedly preached. So, and this is something that I think it's an important factor. I mean, we can keep an open mind. Maybe sometimes in the future it might happen that this kind of inscriptions will appear, but we don't have any evidence that Christianity had become part of religious culture in the area of in the traditional area of Mecca, Medina. And so this is something that I think is important. It's important to keep in mind. Yes.
So yeah, just first on Steven Shoemaker's book, it is entitled Creating the Qur'an, a Historical Critical Study, to be published in July 2022. So soon after this discussion will be released on YouTube. So I would encourage everyone to look at that. Yeah, and I mean, points have been made. Well, I mean, it's hard to summarize here. I do have an article on my academia from the TLS that people can look at, which raises some questions specifically about the dating of the Birmingham Codex, which is actually part of the collection of Paris manuscripts. So calibrating carbon-14 testing is an issue. Environmental factors are an issue. And then I think there's been some carbon dating of later dated manuscripts of the Quran, where there's a real variation between the actual date and the colophon of the manuscript and the evidence of the carbon-14 dating. So, I mean, those are some reasons, to be skeptical. I think the Quran is early, but anyway, another topic. And then, for inscriptions, I mean, I would basically agree, and I've had, conversations with Guillaume D about this, who has, has written about this, who has strong opinions. But we do have inscriptions both in the south and then, the area of Dumat al-Jandal or Hegra, so north of Yathrib, north of Medina, with crosses. Leila Name, as you probably know, has worked on that. So I'll grant that, like in Mecca itself, but also there's a recent inscription recently restudied by Ahmed Jalad and Haytham Sidki, who have appeared on this channel, so people can find my interviews with them, in a place called Rih az-Zalala. I don't know if did you see their study on this?
I think I did. Yes. I mean, recently, as I mentioned, I haven't been particularly active in Quranic studies because I was busy with my book on the Syriac Alexander legend. But I know what inscription you're talking about.
Yeah. Anyway, so it's not explicitly Christian, but it is monotheistic, and they probably want to date it to the 5th century. It's between Ta'if and Mecca. So, but I mean, this connects to a larger argument of your article, which is. You do show that there seems to be a contrast between the Quranic interest in Christianity and the tradition's portrayal of Mecca and Medina, for that matter, as places with no Christianity. So what are we to make of that? How should scholars approach that tension, maybe?
I mean, I think it's very interesting. Before we continue, I mean, it's important to clarify that I'm not claiming that no one in Mecca or Medina or whatever in that area, wherever in that area, had ever heard about Christianity. Maybe they did. What I'm claiming is that Christianity, as far as we know, as far as the evidence tells us, did not play any major role in the religious life of people of the Hijaz. We don't have any evidence to prove the contrary. The only possible evidence is the Quran. If we accept the assumption that the entirety of the Quran comes from the Hijaz, and this is one of the main points of my article, because there is a clear contradiction between the picture emerging from the Quran and the one which is described in the tradition. I mean, we don't need to go into the details, but just to design an outline, the tradition tells us that Muhammad had to face the opposition of some polytheist, local polytheist people and of Jews, Jewish community members in Medina. Christians are almost absent from traditional accounts on the life of Muhammad. However, when we go through the Quran,
there's just, I'm sorry to jump in. I mean, someone might object and say, well, there's Bahira, there's Waraqa, there's some Christians who come from Najran. Yeah, what would you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, we should be also careful with reading these sources. Sometimes I'm not totally convinced that they are very reliable, but yeah, maybe there were Christian monks or whatever passing by the area.
Say something like that in the article. Like, these are figures that are somehow marginal to the actual community. They're coming from Najran. Obviously, Bahira is up in Syria. Waraka is sort of mysteriously in Mecca, and he kind of disappears anyway from Muhammad's life after affirming the prophet, or the call to prophethood. He sort of disappears. I know there are a couple of narratives about what happened to him later, but
exactly. But however, the Quran refers to stories like the one of the sleepers of Ephesus, or the one of Dhu-l-Qarnayn, that were popular among Christians, and that in the especially in the Syriac speaking area. And one, I think, really struggles to see how the audience would be able to understand the very allusive Quranic language if it was not composed by people who were grown in a flourishing Christian culture. So it's not only a matter of having characters, Christian characters floating around in the background of Muhammad's life. I mean, from certain Quranic passages, we get the picture of a real flourishing Christian center. It's a bit unlikely to me that this can be.
Sorry, I just want to emphasize that point and like double down on it, because I mean, I agree emphatically. I think the Quran's the suggestion the Quran offers us is that there was a flourishing Christian community, or at least there is robust engagement with Christianity. So not only do we have, Jesus, Mary, John the Baptist appearing in the Quran, but we have references to monks, to ruhban, to priests. I mean, it's a debated term, but qasisin. We have references to sawame and bi'a, so maybe monastic cells in churches. There might be, I mean, it's a little bit debated, but allusions to elements of Christian liturgy in the Quran. And then, like you said, I mean, the narratives, these are thoroughly Christian narratives. You alluded to the sleepers of Ephesus story, also that is known in the Quran as the companions of the cave account, and the miracle stories about Jesus. I mean, there's this robust engagement with Christianity, which is almost shocking if you think that the background was simply this either pagan city of Mecca or this Jewish city of Medina.
Exactly. And we have another, and then we have also another, if you want, contradiction between Quran and tradition when it comes to the question, the description of the Mushrikun in the Quran and in the tradition. And this is another question that has been extensively investigated, debated in the past few years. So if you want, the case of Christianity and the case of the representation of the Mushrikun are two parallel cases in which we can really see this inconsistency between Quran and tradition emerging.
Can I just
sure.
add to that a little bit? So Mushrikun, for people who don't know the term, means something like the associators. So, it comes from ashraka, basically, which means to associate something with something else. And it's an accusation the Quran makes of certain opponents that they associate things, in this case, just following the traditional idea, goddesses or gods with the true God, Allah. But I mean, I think your point is that a careful reading of Quran might show that the Mushrikun weren't just like polytheistic idolaters, that it's more nuanced or something.
That's how the Quran seems to represent these Mushrikun in several passages, okay? But I think that the issue is a bit more complicated, and it is related also to that of the possible textual stratification of the Quran. So that's it's in the article I make the case that the at least some parts of the Quran, which I consider to be the oldest, first of all, do not use the term Mushrikun. And they don't even use the verb related to the root. They don't talk about associating. They just talk against some opponents. But from this, how to say, corpus of text within the Quran, this Quran within the Quran, we can find an image, a representation of these opponents of the Quran's prophet that actually matches the representation of the Mushrikun in the tradition. So it's a really, I think, a bit more complicated, the question, and it's related also to how we use the Quran. That is, when we try to write history and when we try to extrapolate elements from the Quran to reconstruct the religious and social background of the text. So I think that a very important notion that we need to keep in mind is that of, as I mentioned, textual stratification, and that the text may contain different layers. And we should keep in mind that not every layer might refer to the context described in the tradition. Otherwise said, there might be passages in the Quran, entire pericopes, even entire surahs, if you want, that do not come from this area between Mecca and Medina.
Okay.
They might come from a different context.
Yeah, so this might be, to some of our viewers, might be like completely new, this idea of stratification. I mean, even to people maybe trained in Quranic studies, students doing Islamic studies or something like that. I mean, we just hear the sort of the standard, let's call it the master narrative, both from the tradition and from, you know, Western Orientalists, is that, yeah, there are elements of the Quran from different periods of Muhammad's life, but we can't speak of stratification in the sense of a text that is the product of an editing process where material of different origin was redacted together, right? Yes. So, yeah, I just want to push you a little bit more on that, and we'll get into your specific proposal of a corpus of text within the Quran, or a sub-corpus of text within the Quran, in just a second. But yeah, I mean, what a reaction when you speak about this to people in Quranic studies, that, you know, we shouldn't just follow the master narrative. We should have maybe a more granular reading of the text, or more attentive, at least an eye that is attentive to the possibility of different sub-corpora or sub-corpuses, which, you know, represent different layers in the Quran. Do people think that this is kind of academic heresy, or yeah, what are reactions?
Well, it's very, I mean, it's a very curious field, because I mean, I was always impressed by the lack of interest that scholars in Quranic studies showed for the idea that maybe we are not dealing with the phenomenon of single authorship. Mm-hmm. Otherwise said, the single authorship is given for granted in many cases. And even when scholars seem to be open to the possibility that there is not only one author, there is always the assumption that it comes from a single community, okay, in a very well-defined context, okay? So maybe some scholars say, okay, this might come from people around Muhammad, but there is also always this idea that there is some kind of concentration of the text in a very specific setting. And I think that this lack of interest for exploring other scenarios more dynamic scenarios in which we have a text that evolves together with the community, and then a text coming from different contexts that come to mingle together in the moment of the expansion of the community. This idea is not even considered very often. Okay, so it's a bit like as the debate is polarized. Also, if you want, this idea of the single authorship is reflected also in the two most common scenarios that the scholars refer to explain the genesis of the Quran. So there is, if we want to go back to the example of Christianity, why there is such a strong Christian presence in the Quran, this has been mostly explained in two ways. The first way was to drag the late antique world within the Hijaz, so bringing the limits of the late antique works a bit more close to the original cradle of the community.
Further to the south from
exactly.
Palestine or Syria down to the Hijaz. Yeah.
Exactly. So imagining the Hijaz as a more as a area more closely connected to these Christian communities in the Syria, Palestine, northern Mesopotamia, and so on. And the second hypothesis is the famous idea that the Quran emerged elsewhere. Okay. And usually this elsewhere is set into the context of Mesopotamia. It's, it's the famous Wansburg's hypothesis.
Or more recently, just to add another wrinkle to the theory, there's been some talk around the work of someone named Dan Gibson. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Yes.
Geography, arguing that Mecca is actually Petra, and yeah.
Exactly. So, but there is always this idea that the entire corpus must originate from a very specific context. Okay, and so this is somehow related also to the idea of the single author. Okay, because we want to imagine that the text goes back to either a single person or a very specific group of people. The only recent attempt, which I found interesting, even if I don't agree, to explore a more dynamic setting, has been done by one Cole, who thought that Muhammad was an itinerary prophet who used to address, to change his preaching, to adapt his preaching to different communities. But it's also, it's interesting because Cole indeed considers that the Quran might refer to different contexts. But I don't agree with him because there is always the assumption that everything should go back to Muhammad. So it's a bit, but I find it interesting, the hypothesis, because at least it explores this possibility that we don't have a single context of origin.
Okay, yeah. So, and in the article you outline possibilities that during the conquest, so perhaps after the life of Muhammad, there's material which may be more robustly Christian material, which could have been integrated into the corpus.
Yeah, this is my idea. This is my idea because I'm really not convinced. I am very skeptical about a substantial Christian presence in the Hijaz. I mean, there are several factors that make me think otherwise. First of all, I already mentioned the absence of any kind of clear evidence. But also, there is the traditional sources have no problem in mentioning the presence of a Jewish community in Medina. So one cannot even make the case that they are trying to erase monotheistic culture to make a stronger case for the revelation coming from heaven. So
yeah, so this is really interesting and provocative. I mean, just to comment from another field, I mean, there's nothing really radical about this. I mean, if you take biblical studies, both Hebrew Bible and New Testament, by way of comparison, I mean, these sorts of ideas are common. I mean, in the 19th century, people were speaking about the documentary hypothesis of the four sources of the Pentateuch, which differ between the Yahweh source, I mean, emerging in something like 11th century to 10th century BC or BCE, and then the priestly source from the Babylonian exile in the 6th century BC or BCE. I mean, yeah, so these things go on, obviously, with theories of the synoptic formation of the synoptic gospels. All of these ideas, or similar methods, are used. And then, I mean, there's the point of just generally thinking about what this means to have maybe original oral composition, maybe, not sure if you agree with that. So the very earliest stages of development, how that moves to how the oral composition could play a role, and then potentially the text could circulate orally before it's written in different contexts. But because we don't have too much time, I wanted to turn to your proposal in this argument. So think of the first part of the title where we have the Qur'ans with an S plural for a particular sub-corpus. And you list a whole number of surahs, most of which are short and towards the end of the Quranic text as we have it now. But I mean, a good deal, I didn't count, but maybe between 20 and 30, something like that. Does that sound right?
I didn't count either.
Okay. But yeah, a good deal, something like that. Yeah, and but you're very precise in identifying commonalities between these surahs. I mean, anyone who's interested in getting the precise list, I won't read it off here. Just go to Professor Tesei's article on his academia site, The Qur'ans in Context, from Journal Asiatique. But he notes that, or you note the features that are common to all of these surahs, which is the use of idha, like when or if at the opening, and then formulas or formulae such as wama adraka, what has made you known, references to companions of the right, companions of the left. These short surahs are generally, or I think completely, not just generally, missing the root sheen ra kaf, which has to do with association. I think they're also completely missing the references to ar-Rahman, that is God with the divine name, the merciful, or to references to a prophet as a Nabi, cognate with Hebrew Navi, meaning prophet. Also that they have short verses and many hapexes. So yeah, I mean, what does this mean? What's the importance of identifying this group of texts that all share these features? How does it relate to traditional ideas about, what Pedro Nunzica said? We just have early Meccan, middle Meccan, late Meccan. Why is what you've observed something different from that?
Okay, so first of all, I want to add another thing that you mentioned the stylistic commonalities, the stylistic features of this corpus of surahs, which are very peculiar, because I mean the style of these surahs is very different from the style of other parts of the Quran. But what is also important is that the contents of the surah, these surahs are sometimes very coherent among the corpus, but inconsistent with other parts of the Quran. And what is really interesting is that the picture that emerges from these surahs actually matches the picture of the societal background of Muhammad's life. So the most clear example is perhaps the complete lack of Christian figures. We have references to biblical prophets, but not to, would say, 100% Christian figures.
So not to Jesus or Mary, John the Baptist.
Exactly. And we have other cases like this, but it's not only the style that appears to be coherent across the source. It's also, the
yeah. So that's very important because it is sort of now we have with our technology two-source authentication. So it's something like that, right? Because you have the stylistic matching the actual text or content.
Yes. So, and I mean, the readers familiar with Quranic studies, when they will, if they will be curious and go read the article and check which surahs these surahs are, will probably be disappointed, saying, yeah, but this is the first Meccan period, everybody knows. So, and this is because in the chronology of the Quran, elaborated first by the Islamic tradition, then refined by Western scholars, there were already attempts to select this corpus of surahs. The difference is that this was set into a chronological framework. Okay, I mean, it's not so surprising that we all came to the same conclusions, because chronology is also based on the study of the style of the Quran.
Right.
And
that's a really important point. Yeah.
And the coherence of this corpus of surahs I selected is so evident and so, how to say, the style is so different from the rest of the Quran that this corpus of surahs has constantly been considered to be something apart, usually the earliest layer of the Quran.
So, I mean, does this mean that you somehow worked with the same observations that maybe Suyuti and Zarkashi and then Gustav Weil and Theo de Noordelijke made, Rajiv Lacher afterwards, but without the presuppositions? I've just pulled up the article here. So some of the surahs are 52, 53, 56, 69, 70, 74, 75, 77, 78, 79. And as you know, I mean, most of them do date to the what Noordelijke classifies as first Meccan. But I mean, for Noordelijke, everything should be seen. I mean, his book is called The History of the Quran. So everything should be seen within this history, where Muhammad is thinking a certain way at the beginning and then changes gradually in Mecca and then finally in Medina. And so by taking away those presuppositions of single authorship and the chronological basis or foundation for reading the surahs, everything changes, basically. I mean, now you can see the possibility that what you have is not just development over time, but maybe stratification or different contexts.
Yeah, exactly. So I would say that when I started this analysis of this corpus of surahs, I didn't refer to previous studies by either Quranic commentators or Western scholars. So I was just working on the text and trying to identify common stylistic traits. And then when I selected this corpus of surahs, I just said, okay, this matches sometimes not entirely, but grosso modo it matches the work of others. As myself, why? And the question is that because there is no other possible outcome if you work on the style. It is so evident that this is something, a group apart, then you can read it in different ways. To me, it's
right. So the evidence is clear, and Nozdeko is really noticing something. It's just what you do with the evidence, that sort of next step, and you diverge dramatically. Well,
I mean, sorry, I want to add something. For instance, there is this famous study by Sadeghi about the chronology of the Quran, and also Sadeghi recognizes that if you put this corpus of surahs in the framework of the idea of a chronological development, then I don't remember exactly the word he uses, but he says that there was some kind of strong stylistic break or something like that at the beginning of Muhammad's prophetic career. So a radical change in the way the prophet preached to his community. So if you want to keep the idea of a chronological development, I mean, I have another idea. I mean, maybe it's easier if I just, it's not very nice to quote myself, but I think if I just read the passage from the article, it's going to be clearer. So in the article, I say, let us now try to situate our corpus of surahs in the framework of a chronological development of Muhammad's preaching, and to consider them as the first literary expressions of his religious message. From such a perspective, it follows that the prophet's modus communicandi changed dramatically as his prophetic career unfolded. Some common terms and formulaic elements were abandoned and replaced by others. The original lexical wealth and variety gave way to a standardized vocabulary. The rhyme-prose structure was abandoned. The initial apocalyptic fervor was mitigated. The representation of the social and cultural background and the nature of opposition to the new message also changed. So if we take this corpus and we consider this, no, this is only the first, reflects only the first period of Muhammad's life, then it changed. We have to admit that the change was enormous. Not only in the way the prophet decided to communicate his message, but also in the social environment, okay? All of a sudden we see Christians appearing, also the way in which other opponents are described change. We start hearing about Mushrikun, the way the Jews are described also changes. So it's really a dramatic shift. And to me, it really takes a lot of faith, a leap of faith, to believe that all these might have happened.
In one context, but why not instead think of more than one context?
Exactly. This is especially since the image that emerges from this corpus matches the representation of the environment of Muhammad's preaching in the tradition.
Okay, interesting. Well, as a final step in our conversation, I'd like to look at something you do in the end of the article, where you bring up two case studies of surahs within your subcorpus, and I'd like to three. Sorry, I saw Surah An-Najm 53, and then you're right. There are two others, surahs both 73 and 74. Yeah, thank you for that.
There is also 91, so it's 4.
Oh, actually 4. Okay. Yeah. So in any case, I'd like to focus on Surah An-Najm, which is famous for its verses known, or maybe infamous, known as Satanic verses. And so we're going to speak about those. First, I want to quote you as well, because you write here in introducing this part of the article, to support my hypothesis, I now present 3 case studies of surahs in our corpus that contain verses that are stylistically and conceptually diverging from most verses in the corpus. Okay, so these are all surahs from your corpus or subcorpus, but they have these verses which are dramatically different. If we follow chronological reading of the Quran, these verses are later insertions in early surahs. In my view, however, these verses are better explained as exegetical glosses added to the text by authors operating in different cultural contexts. Okay, I want to speak about just one example. In Surah An-Najm or Surah 53, you referred to a couple of different possible exegetical glosses, but the one I want to speak about is the famous one dealing with the Satanic verses. So here we read verse 19, have you considered Alat and El-Uzza, just keep on going, and Manat, the third one, the other, and are you to have the males and he the females? What a bizarre distribution. Yeah, there's some questions about these, how to understand that word, but anyway. And then you have long verse 23. These are nothing but names which you have invented, you and your forefathers, a practice God has never authorized. They follow nothing but assumptions and what the ego desires, although guidance has come to them from their Lord. And then you have back to short verses, 24, or is the human being to have whatever he desires? 25, to God belong the last and the first. So you have something pretty dramatic here. Now, the rhyme stays the same. It's this long Alif Maksura rhyme. Al-Uzza, Al-Ukhra, Al-Untha, Diza, Al-Huda. So the rhyme stays the same, but you have this one verse which is dramatically longer than the others. You would say maybe something about the content itself suggests that it's an exegetical gloss?
Yeah, exactly. First of all, I should add that after starting from verse 26 through until verse 32, we have another succession of longer verses, which is also relevant because in these verses we find elements of the Quranic polemic against the Mushrikun. In these verses, we find the allegation that these opponents name angels with female names. Okay, so if we connect this to the other long verse, we have the idea that these are only names. And later we read that these people name angels with female names. So it's suggesting that the opponents venerate female angels. This is an allegation that we find elsewhere in the Quran, together with the idea that these opponents attribute sons and daughters to God, and that this progeny of God is angels. Now, some scholars quoting the late Patricia Crone used these specific verses in Surah 53 to make the case that the prophet was dealing with some kind of a syncretic cult. So in which the local deities, you mentioned them by name. This surah is particularly famous because it's the only place in the Quran where these three deities are mentioned by name. So Crone and Doting made the case that this is a syncretic cult in which these local pre-Islamic deities came to be identified with angels and as daughters of God. Now, I don't think this is the case because, first of all, it doesn't take, one shouldn't even know Arabic to take the original Arabic text of the surah to realize that there is something extremely strange which concerns the length of the verse, okay? Of the verses, of these verses that I suppose were interpolated. Now, when we remove these verses, these longer verses, it is extremely interesting that what we find is very close to what we can reconstruct from the information in this tradition, because the surah clearly addresses some kind of astrological cult. We have already the initial, the way the surah opens one najm, there is an invocation by the star. And then we have also the information that the claim that God is the owner of Sirius, the star. So we can, and Sirius is listed among the astrological cults in pre-Islamic Arabia in the tradition. So if we remove these verses from which it appears, it would seem that these opponents had this kind of syncretic cult. If we remove them, we just find basically what we find in traditional sources. We have 3 pre-Islamic deities, and we have a preacher fighting against them, if you want, in a way which is also very interesting, because we are talking about a prophet who supposedly promotes strict monotheism, but who is not ashamed of opening with the invocations of natural phenomena. Okay, it's extremely interesting, the background we have. My understanding of this is that this kind of polemic, religious polemic, which addressed a very specific context, could not be really understood outside of that context when the community expanded, okay? And these glosses represent some kind of rationalization. Who are these 3 names? Latra, Uz, and Manat. Who are they? We don't know, because outside of that context, it might have been difficult to understand who they were. Using a typical argument that you find in polemics between pagans and Christians, a bit more north in the Roman Empire, if you want. These are only angels. That was a very common argument used in this kind of polemics. So my idea is that these longer verses reflect this kind of rationalization of what was contained in this corpus of text that could not be understood anymore outside of the original context.
Very interesting. Very interesting.
Now, the most interesting thing, because you mentioned the Satanic verses, now I don't want to enter into the discussion. It's a very complex tradition. There is a book published a few years ago by exactly, which is a very detailed study of the tradition of the Satanic verses. I don't want to debate whether it is historically plausible or not, what this tradition tells us. What is interesting is that it somehow admits that there was an editorial process applied to this surah, that something was removed, maybe, but more importantly for us, that something was added. And this something coincides exactly with the verses we are talking about here. These verses that stylistically are very different. Of course, the tradition attributes this new insertion to Muhammad. So again, it really depends on the perspective that we want to adopt. But also, the Islamic tradition acknowledges that something happened there, that there was some kind of manipulation.
Yeah. I mean, at least in my opinion, what seems to prompt the Satanic verses story is a verse in Surah 22, which speaks about a shaitan casting into the mind of a prophet, and then God doing naskh, abrogating the things that Satan casts. But then the story unfolds around the material in Surah 53. Presumably because they noted something with this long verse. Yes. Well, I think probably we should wrap things up. And there's a lot more I wanted to speak about. I wanted to get into the field of Quranic studies generally, but we might need to save that for a second go. Did you want to add anything? I don't want to cut you off either. Any final thoughts there?
No, let's not enter into the conversation about the current status of Quranic studies. Otherwise, we would. It's already late at night here in China, so we would stay here until tomorrow morning.
Well, any suggestions for our viewers if they want to stay in touch with your work or any new projects that you want to promote as a final thing?
I am hopefully about to publish a monograph, but on a Syriac text, which is relevant for the study of the Quran. It's called Nesana Alexandros, and I consider this text to be the source of the Dhu-l-Qarnayn pericope. Future projects, I don't know. I mean, this study on the Syriac Alexander legend was meant as a new phase in my academic career outside of Quranic studies, but there are people like Gabriel who are doing their best to drag me back into that research field. So I might dedicate my future efforts just to the Alexander legends in the Quran.
Okay, terrific. Well, Tommaso, thank you so much. Thank you for your friendship and for this great conversation.
Thank you.
Well, friends, thanks for being with us for this episode of Exploring the Quran and the Bible. I hope you found it to be an edifying discussion. I really hope that you find generally the content on this channel to be useful. There's a really diverse range of things in regard to Quranic studies and biblical studies with top-notch scholars. And we'll be really grateful for your support. So please don't hesitate to like the videos, starting with this one maybe, to subscribe to the channel and to share the news with your friends about exploring the Quran and the Bible.